Hi, I'm Mary Kelly, and this is FutureNomics. So FutureNomics takes economics and combines it with what's happened in the past, what's happening right now, what's going to happen in the future, and how you as a business leader in this industry can take that information and turn it into the decisions you need to make in order for your company to prosper. How is our business right now affected by world events? And there's certainly a lot going on. Will things like economic sanctions and tariffs affect our business on a day-to-day level? Are we going to have a recession? Okay, so the big secret here, we're kind of in a recession right now. Maybe you noticed the second quarter was down 31% of our gross domestic product. That's our GDP. Now, our gross domestic product is measured per capita or by person, and this tells us how healthy the economy is overall. A recession is defined as 2 successive quarters of negative GDP growth. Because we're doing so well for so long, once we had that big burp in the economy of first quarter of 3%, all of a sudden it drove that second quarter down as people stopped spending in retail stores, in restaurants, the travel industry shut down, the tourism and hospitality industries shut down, and people had to stay home. It meant that they're spending less. So how does this affect us, and how does this affect our leadership? Leaders are always challenged by everything going on around us. This has been the list that I've kept for years on the things I worry about and I stay up at night thinking about. Syria, the North Korean issue, ISIS, Iran, global refugees, trade conflicts, political ugliness, economic crises, lack of civility overall, oh yes, and added in 2020, the coronavirus. So this is the 411 on me. I was in the Navy for about 25 years. I've been able to go on and off aircraft carriers as well as other naval ships. I was in the 8th class of women to be able to attend the Naval Academy. I was listed on a list of economists in the world, and I made it to 56, so that's when they stopped holding the list, and that's where I get to stay, so I'm pretty happy about that. I was able to teach both at the Air Force Academy for 10 years as a civilian and at the Naval Academy for 4 years while I was still on active duty. I met my Marine Corps husband while we were both doing counterterrorism, and I'm the author of about 15 leadership and business books. My most recent one is called Who Comes Next? Leadership Succession Planning Made Easy. And I know we're all focusing on economics in this particular session, but the economic crisis is going to be exacerbated by the baby boomer retirement crisis of succession planning not happening right now. Economics is largely anecdotal, deeply personal, and emotional for a lot of people. Do I have a good company, and do I have a good job? Do my loans cost more? How are my investments doing? If it affects you personally, you're very myopic, you're thinking very inwardly, this is how you perceive everyone else as well. If your kids have a job, your friends have jobs, their kids have jobs, and the people you know in your community have jobs, you think things are humming along pretty well. Statistically, as you're practicing economist, we look at everything that's happening. So a quick question. What industries are suffering right now from the coronavirus? And there's a whole list of them. Think about transportation, hotels, hospitality, restaurants. The list is long, and it's easy to get tied up into that list. But there are also some companies that are benefiting from this crisis. So the companies that might be benefiting could include what? Well, as it turns out, home sales are up as people have decided if I don't have to work from an office space, if I don't have to work at company headquarters, I can migrate other places. Moving companies have seen a big uptick in what's happening for their business. Many delivery organizations have seen increase in sales and customers that they did not have before. Maybe a retirement home that had never ordered Grubhub or DoorDash before. Now they can do that too. So we're seeing this as a forced acceleration of a lot of business components. And in Park Meadows, Colorado, there's a store that has cropped up just for COVID-19 essentials. Now that's capitalism at its finest. So let's talk a little bit about how this is affecting certain sectors of our economy as well as the global economy. Financial institutions is any company that deals with financial and monetary transactions. So this could be your local bank, your local credit union, it could be online banking, it could be dealing in Bitcoin, anyone who deals with monetary transactions. And this could be where you get your loans, even if it's a third-party loan or an online loan. It can also include your investments and any kind of currency exchange. Financial institutions for 2020 took a big hit. Most of them are down by over 25%. And partly it's because interest rates have been dropped so low that they cannot make money right now. So we're seeing financial institutions really suffer. So as we get into this, we're talking about a recession. And the definition of a recession, remember, 2 successive quarters of decreasing GDP growth. We are in a recession. Our last major recession, of course, 2008, that merged into 2009, and it just felt like we were in a recession for a long time. But keep in mind, it's kind of like going to the gym. If you're a really healthy person and you work out a lot, it's harder and harder and harder to see improvement in, say, your muscle mass or your body weight. Let's say you're really in great shape and you've got 4% fat content in your body and everything else is just perfect. You're just the perfect person. For you to try to decrease some of that fat mass in your body when you're already very, very fit, it's really, really hard. However, if maybe you've got a little bit more ways to go, it might be a little bit easier to lose some of that fat. My point here is, like an economy, in any economy, it is easy to fall into a recession if you're doing really well, because any small dip is considered a decrease in growth. So the healthier your economy is, the more it feels it numerically when you start to fall into that recession place. Inflation. Inflation is the general upward movement of prices. And that generally means a decrease in the purchasing value of money. For example, you all know the price of gas. When you go to the pump to fill up on gas, you know if it was $2.06 or $2.25 or $2.79, you know. And every time you pay more per gallon at the pump, it registers in your head. That's a metric that most of us unconsciously keep in our head. And we think about it. We think, oh, gas prices are going up. Wow, the economy must be accelerating. That's sort of true, but sort of not. The way we measure inflation is a market basket of goods and services across the country. So for example, think about you've got a grocery cart full of things that you just bought at the grocery store. You bought a specific box of a specific kind of breakfast cereal. You bought a certain toothpaste. You bought a certain amount of detergent. You bought a certain kind of yogurt. They measure those exact brands in different parts of the country, and then they measure the cost of all of those. This comes out every couple months, and the idea is to figure out if we have a general upward trend of prices. That's inflation, when prices go up. And right now we've got very low inflation. Really low inflation. The target inflation rate set by the Federal Reserve is usually between 2 and 3%. And you think, why in the world would the government want a target for prices to increase? Because you want to keep it within that range. Within that range, it keeps pace with salaries and wages, and it makes sure that we don't have runaway inflation where prices are so high and accelerating so quickly that people feel as though there was a shortage. Now, yes, I do realize that in 2020, some people felt as though toilet paper costs were part of inflation because they would go to the store, there wouldn't be any, and then they would find a kid selling toilet paper by the roll on the street corner for $1. Now that, of course, is a higher price, and of course that's a fun example, but that's not really inflation. Let's talk a little bit about the housing trends, and I've referred to this because housing is such a big component of what we spend money on and how we build our wealth. Many people again say, well, the price of homes has just gotten out of control. But has it really? It might seem that way, especially if you're talking to maybe a grandparent who says, well, I bought my first home with this much money. But is that really accurate? The trends we have actually indicate that home prices have done pretty well, but it's fairly consistent. I thought you might find it interesting that in August of 2020, homes in what's considered the West were the most expensive, and that in the Northeast it was second most expensive, followed by the South, and then in the Midwest. And if you're trying to figure out where your state falls, it is on the chart. So for example, we think about the average price of a home in America, and can the average worker purchase the average home in America? And the answer is yes. So the average home price at the beginning of 2020 was about $270,000. So let's say you're going to put down 20%, which is fairly standard, on that average home of $270,000. And again, in all those home prices, it does consider apartments and townhouses and duplexes and everything else. It's not always a single family home. And the two pictures I use are both single family homes, so I didn't want that to be misleading. At $270,000, if you put down 20%, that's a $54,000 down payment. That means you have a mortgage of $216,000. Let's say you take the standard mortgage, which is 30 years. Now again, at the beginning of 2020, that was right under 4%. At the beginning of 2021, it's below 3%. So this means the monthly payments have actually decreased. You can buy more home for less money. That's good for a lot of Americans. So if you take that mortgage rate of, be very conservative, of the beginning of 2020, and that's $1,017, then think about the average tax rate, and these are just averages throughout the country, of $171 plus insurance of say $95. And that gives you a monthly payment of $1,283. Now because of that, you say that's a monthly payment and I can afford that. Now tack on maybe some other utilities and let's just bump it up maybe another $200. And that would be right under $1,500 for your monthly payment for homes. Now, the median income, the average in America, so we call it the median because we know that there's people who make a whole lot less and a whole lot more. But that average is about $65,000 at 2020, in the year 2020. So most real estate agents will tell you that they don't want you to spend more than 28% of your income on your housing. So take 28% of $65,000 and that gives you $18,200. Divide that by 12. That gives you a monthly payment of $1,516. So the conclusion there is the average American family can buy the average American home. Where we get into trouble is when we want more home than what we can afford, or if we're not meeting something close to the average salary or wages. This is where it gets troublesome. But housing has accelerated. Right now, we are seeing more first-time home buyers than we did a year ago. 34% of new home buyers in 2020 versus 32% in 2019. We're seeing more people buy second homes. That's up to 19% of the overall market versus 16% a year ago. And interestingly enough, they're not paying for those second homes in all cash. What they're doing is they're financing it because they're probably able to get a rate that's well below 3%. A few weeks ago, my own personal financial institution was averaging a 2.79 interest rate for the mortgage they were putting out for their members and their clients. So because of that, there's a lot of things you can do with that money if you're only paying a 2.5 or 2.88 or 2.9 percentage on the mortgage of your home. And if you increase your mortgage to shift it from a 30-year mortgage to a 15-year mortgage, you can actually get a better interest rate. Now, let's say you already have a 30-year mortgage and you're thinking, maybe I should pay it off early, but interest rates are really low. Should I do that? The easy way to do this, if you just bought a home and you got that 30-year mortgage, is you take that monthly mortgage payment of, let's say, for easy math, let's say your monthly payment is $1,200. And what you want to do is add in another $100 or $105 every payment every month, which essentially means you're making one full monthly payment at the beginning of every year or throughout the year. And this will mathematically take a 30-year mortgage, if you start right away, down to an 18-year mortgage. Now, why is this so important? Because for the 63.5% of Americans who own their own home, it represents 65% of their overall wealth. So here's what's troubling, because many millennials have not started buying homes yet because they're doing things that take commitment, such as being involved in I'm going to get this right, a mostly monogamous, occasionally romantic relationship with another person. Or they're having children, again, 7 to 8 years later than their parents did, and they're buying their homes 7 to 8 years later than their parents did as well. This worries me because it means they don't have those extra 7 to 8 years of building wealth and equity. So I worry about this because if you don't start buying a house or start the process by the time you're 30 or even 35, all of a sudden you've lost some peak earning years for equity in that house. And some people back in January said, you know what, I don't need all these material things. I'm going to move into a tiny house. That tiny house, now that everyone is working from home, you, your partner, your kids, your in-laws moved in, that tiny house may have gotten a lot tinier. So let's talk a little bit about taxes. If I was to ask you, raise your hand whether or not you think taxes are going to increase, what would you say? Would you say yes or would you say no? Taxes start generally, when we think about taxes, at the federal level. We think about our federal income taxes and the things that are taken out of our taxes, such as Social Security and Medicare. All those things that when you got your first paycheck, you're like, who's FICA and why are they taking all my money? These are taxes. We pay taxes to not only on the federal level for a federal income tax, but we also pay state income taxes depending upon the state you live in. You might also have a county tax or a city tax. In many cases, property taxes are used by that county or that city to help pay for local county issues like your fire department, your police department, your library, and your schools. Taxes are going to go up. You heard it here. Taxes are going to go up. Because of all of the bailouts that happened in 2020, taxes are going to have to go up. Our national debt has gone up, so taxes are going to have to follow suit. So start saving money now. So let's think about your investments. Depending upon where you are and what you invest in, you could either be very happy or very sad. And I get that. Many people invest in collectibles such as Beanie Babies or Barbie dolls or expensive rugs or fine china. Collectibles oftentimes do not retain their value because you need then a double coincidence of wants. Depending upon when we're having this conference will depend on whether or not your investments for the year are up or down. There's increased volatility in the market because of the uncertainty around the virus, around the elections, around a lot of jobs that people are a little bit worried, so they're hanging on to that money. Many people are hanging on to more cash than they otherwise would. Normally they would have it in the stock market, or normally they would have it invested in something else, but they're hanging on to more cash because of uncertainty. Jobs right now are doing okay. Not great, but okay. And they will increase in terms of opportunity and hirings moving into the next year. So the great thing about this, though, is if you are an employer, you now have available talent that you did not have before. A year ago, you couldn't hire these people. A year ago, anybody who could fog a mirror was getting a job. And now employers can afford to be choosy about who they hire, which means if you're an employee and you're not stepping up your game, watch out, because there's competition out there for your job. And make sure if you are an employer, make sure if you're trying to attract great talent that you make sure your technology works. It has to work at work. It has to work for the people who come into your workplace. It has to work for your employees. Otherwise, it wastes your employees' time. It irritates the people who are coming into your business to do business. It frustrates your staff. And frankly, depending upon who you're hiring, they could leave simply because your technology at work is promised, but it doesn't work. It's frustrating. As a result, more employees are figuring out, gosh, I do have to compete in the workforce. I do have to compete in the marketplace. Half of all the tasks that people are paid to do every day are at the risk of being automated. So people are thinking, I've got to upskill. I've got to retrain myself. I've got to be that competitive employee. Employers are investing in training and developmental programs because there was a survey that said about 71% of millennials would leave a job if they did not feel as though they were being personally and professionally developed at work. Personally and professionally developed at work. And people say, well, do we really want those people in our workplace anyway? The answer is kind of yes. And the fact that they're still staying after a couple of years is a good indicator of the workplace you're in. But the millennials and younger generations feel as though they have a hammock, so it's okay to change jobs more frequently. Now, don't go digging on the millennials or the Gen Zers or anybody else, because even though they statistically change jobs every 2.6 years, you baby boomers out there, you're at 4.1 years. So you're changing jobs too. And that could be due to a variety of factors, but please don't overlook talent when you see talent. One of the websites I love is willrobotstakemyjob.com. You're wondering, here's the answer. Can robots drive trucks? No, they can't. even though there's this big movement for what I call the headless horseman idea of driverless cars, people don't want robots driving semis. You can look it up, Will Robots Take My Job.com. So let's talk about consumer confidence. Consumer confidence is important because in our GDP, our gross domestic product, it's comprised of consumer confidence, how much consumers spend, and that's an actual number, plus our business investment, plus our government expenditures, plus our exports minus our imports. And when we think about that, we think, well, is it really that much consumer spending? The answer is yes. It is 70% of our GDP. So if you want to encourage people to spend money just to stimulate the economy, you go for it. Every time people get worried about end of the year, I say, wait a second, Americans love to shop during the holidays. Don't negate what they're going to do for the holidays. So consumer confidence is about how we feel about current and future economic conditions. Now it's an indicator, but it's based on very subjective data. And we mostly base it on the point of sale. I can't figure out if you were thinking, do I get the Frosted Flakes or the Lucky Charms? Frosted Flakes, Lucky Charms. Oh, you're standing there. They're both so good. Which one do I had? Well, I can measure which one you walked out of the store with. I cannot measure what you thought of that other product that went back on the shelf. So the fact that you walked out with the Lucky Charms, good for you. But I can't measure the fact that Frosted Flakes was a close second. And that goes into our consumer expenditures. So consumer confidence can be either very high, my job is safe, the economy is doing well, I feel so optimistic, or it can be very low. My job isn't very secure, the economy feels bad, I feel pessimistic. Now, we talk about the idea of an optimist in different programs, but for consumer confidence, when we talk about optimism, it kind of falls into the idea of I can make the situation better, I have some control. High consumer confidence is characterized by consumers spending more money. The demand is strong for products. There are lots of jobs. The people you know who want jobs have jobs. Investments are growing, and people are borrowing more because they feel confident that they'll be able to pay off that mortgage, pay off that auto loan. When consumer confidence is lower, consumers spend less. Demand is weakened. The job market is weaker, and the wages are falling as well. So that concerns people as they're a little bit more desperate for jobs. Investments tend to shrink. And this is where we're at an interesting place because 2020 saw some great investment returns depending upon what you were in. With low consumer confidence, people tend to borrow less as well. Now, some consumers are still spending like this when they should be spending more like this. Depending upon where you are and depending upon the security of your job, you may be in one of those categories. So let's talk for a second about the national debt. The national debt is the amount of money a country's government has borrowed in order to pay off what it has spent. Now, for those of you who don't wake up every morning and look at the national debt, I'm going to show you where to go to find actual numbers because many people say, I know our national debt is high, but how high is it really? Let's find out. So if you look at this number right here represents the national debt overall. Now this is going to change by the time you see this. So what you want to do, I'd like to encourage you, is go to usdebtclock.org and look this up because it's a scrolling number. It changes all the time. Whenever I feel super cheerful in the morning, I don't need to feel so cheerful. I just look at the usdebtclock.org and I'm immediately brought back to reality. So this is our debt per person at this taping. So it's $81,121. That's debt per citizen. And that's every man, woman, child, babies. Babies don't pay very many taxes unless you're super cute and you have a job and you're a model, whatever. But this is per citizen. So that's a different number than this number, which is the GDP per taxpayer. So think about your family. How many people in your family are actually paying taxes? This is what they individually owe. $215,000 almost at the time of this taping. So go ahead to US Debt Clock and take a look at some of these figures. Because many people say, well, it's so high, does it matter anyway? At some point in time, it's gonna matter. This is the issue. A couple other interesting things that you can find at US Debt Clock that may be interesting to you is over here. This is the US population. Now again, we do a census every 10 years. This is why they emphasize the participation in the census, because we want to know how many people we actually have in the population. And then we compare that to this number right here, which is the number of people in the workforce right now. Now, we have seen a decline in the workforce for a couple reasons. First, some people were furloughed, and then they thought their jobs were going to come back, and then they didn't. The 28,000 people laid off from Disney comes to mind. Those people thought they were going back to work, and then they're not. Some of those people will never get back into the labor force. Remember, the millennial generation and the Gen Zers are underrepresented in the labor force right now. The over 55 crowd is overrepresented in the labor force right now. So we compare these numbers to try to figure out who's working, who's going to work, and what's happening. Some other fun things that you might be interested in. These are the largest budget items. Here is Medicare and Medicaid. Here's Social Security. Here's defense that also includes Homeland Security in some areas. And then here's the interest on our debt. This is all very scary to me. So now that you're all good and depressed, let's talk about your personal debt. Let's do that. And I love that I get to wave my arm and make things go away. The personal debt is the debt that you are personally responsible for. This is your car debt, this is your mortgage, these are all your credit cards added all up, and anything you owe your neighbor or your friends. It's your personal debt. So for some people, they have not bought a new car or hadn't before 2020. In 2019, the average new car loan, this is the loan, not the purchase price, was just over $32,000. The average price was over $36,000. What's interesting about that is that moving into 2020, because when people stopped driving, automobile brokers and lots were worried that people were not going to buy cars, except they did. Because more people were making more money on unemployment than they were actually at work, they had more disposable income to go out and buy a car. Car sales have actually increased since May of 2020. And the loan rates, this is the average for 4 years, about at the start of 2020, it was at 7%, and now it's even lower. So cars are actually more affordable as well as houses. So wages and salaries, what we get paid, and most people say, well, I don't get paid what I'm worth. So if you ever hear that, I just need you to know it's kind of patently untrue. You competed for this job. You said you were going to do a great job at this job, and you knew what the pay was when you got into this job. So wages and salaries have increased by about 3% per year. That's about standard, and that is standard for 2020 as well, which more than keeps up with the inflation we're seeing in 2020. Unemployment. It's a little bit all over the map right now, and as of this conversation, and I'll add amplifying data, you can find unemployment numbers. It's interesting to me that we went from about 3% in February to 8% in September. So that unemployment number has risen, but again, it's coming back in 2021. Now, a couple of things I thought you might find interesting are the U.S. stores that have declared bankruptcy in 2020. And again, this is largely because of consumer expenditures shifting into more high-priced goods like houses and cars. But if you look at the list, it's very, very interesting. It's Brooks Brothers, it's Century 21 Stores, not the real estate company. Century 21 Stores is retail. JCPenney's, J. Crew, GNC, Lord & Taylor, Neiman Marcus, Pier 1, Stein Mart, and the Lane Bryant and Ann Taylor chains, and Chuck E. Cheese. So most of those, guess what, dealt with clothing sales. And as people moved to alternate work sites or work from home options, people realized we didn't need the clothes that we were wearing to work all the time. We weren't damaging those clothes. We just didn't need as much. So these have all petitioned to file bankruptcy, as well as the tailored brands, which is Men's Warehouse, Jose Banks, Dean DeLuca, Gold's Gym, Hertz, Muji, Model Sporting Goods, Lucky Brand, La Paine, New York & Company's Stage Stores, that's Gordman's, and then Tuesday Morning. They've all filed for bankruptcy. And some of you haven't heard of this yet, and you're thinking, oh no, where am I going to get my jeans, or how am I going to do this? So again, declaring bankruptcy does not mean they're necessarily out of business forever, but it does mean that for this year, they're having a really rough time. But you can't really blame everything on the coronavirus for this, because here are the store closings in 2019. And these are brick and mortar stores that closed down in 2019, and many of the names are the same. They had already seen decreasing sales moving into the coronavirus pandemic. This is just, again, taking a big light and shining it on the foundations of our business, and now we're seeing the cracks. And this is what you're sort of seeing as a trend for retail stores. If you are a family, and any member of your family is between the ages of 15 and 29, Guess what? You've got a 52% chance that that young adult aged 18 to 29 has moved back home with mom and dad or some parental person. In February of 2020, it was at 47%. Even at the height of kids moving back home with mom and dad at the end of World War II, it was only 48%. And now we're up to 52%. Interestingly, that the 18 to 24-year-olds have been hardest hit by the loss of jobs. They've moved back home first. And that makes a lot of sense. The younger adults are more likely to move back home with mom and dad. Partly because they say that they've been relocated, maybe their retail job went away, those face-to-face customer jobs have gone away, so that could be part of it. Interesting though that Pew did this research and 18% say that it was a job loss or other financial reasons. Okay, I can understand that too. But 23% said it was because their college campuses were closed. But if you live at a college campus, you're still considered living at home with mom or dad, or mom and dad. So some of it is because the supplying vendors around college campuses had to shut down. Those restaurants, those stores, those things. And because those stores closed, the young people had to move back home. And it's interesting to me that young men are more likely to move back home than young ladies at 55%, and the percentage for everyone is highest in the Northeast at 57% have moved back home. And partly that's due to the fact that real estate, again, is pricey in the Northeast. Now, how is leadership related to economics? Is there a correlation? How do you connect the dots? And then what do you do with this information once you have it? And how can I attract and retain the clients, the customers, the vendors, and the partners I have right now? That's what's on a lot of people's mind as well. Does this matter? So economics sounds great, and it's nice to know the theories, but does it actually matter? Well, think like your customers and your clients. The things that your customers or your clients love about you is everything that you do right. It's common courtesy. It's getting a live person when you need them, getting invoicing on time, all those things. The things that drive them nuts are when they call and they can't get anybody on the phone. And for many organizations, this contributed to their downward spiral in 2020 because people who even wanted to do business with those businesses couldn't get anybody on the phone, didn't know if they were open. You can't book an event if you can't get hold of anybody at the hotel. When people advertise for things and then the advertisements are wrong, people tend to lose faith and confidence in that organization. We don't like surprise fees, not anywhere. You don't like it at your bank. You don't like extra taxes thrown on your restaurant bill. People don't like fees that surprise us. And then not providing value when that happens. We also want to make sure, as a leader during tough economic times, you want to make sure you're thanking the people who are helping you and who are making you profitable. Who are the people who are keeping you afloat during tough times? And how do you show that appreciation to your clients for the loyalty they've exhibited to you this entire time? What makes your clients, your customers, your vendors, your suppliers feel special? Show appreciation to the people you get to work with. This goes a long way. And in case you need some suggestions, we have a 5-minute appreciation plan. And some of my favorites on the 5-minute appreciation plan don't even cost you anything at all. So for example, you can just send a thank you note. I realize this is an economics talk, but we've got to make sure that we're strengthening those relationships with the people we do business. And this is important. You can do a thank you email. People tend to not pay as much attention to the thank you emails. Or you can thank the people, and I love this one, who alerted you to a customer problem. Hey, Mrs. Jones, thank you so much for letting us know that this was a problem over in this area. We really appreciate your time letting us know. We want you to know we fixed that. We'd love to see you back. It can be very, very easy. So some of the things that you can do to show appreciation to the people who make your business possible, they don't cost anything and they're important. There's more references. So as I said, the people living paycheck to paycheck have actually decreased in the past few years. Now, I do think there's going to be a change in this if taxes do increase. And here's how you can help your people with their budgeting. Because as leaders, we know that financial stress takes a toll on our employees. It causes stress. They miss work for this. They may be less productive if they're being chased by bill collectors. So part of what we're seeing right now is there's more financial education happening within the workplace. So what do we as leaders do in order to help our people through some economic difficulties and the uncertainty that's plaguing all of us throughout the world right now? Please make sure, number one, that you acknowledge the problem. Make sure that you as the person in charge understands what's actually happening both within your industry, in your business, and with your people and how it's affecting them. Number two, ask the what if questions and get the real answers. I like to take the best case scenario and the worst case scenario. In the best possible set of circumstances, what do we need to prepare for and do next? In the worst set of circumstances, what do we need to prepare for and do next? The answer is probably a combination somewhere in the middle. So figure out your courses of action of the best and the worst, and look at the outcomes so that everyone involved in your business or your clients, everybody knows what's at stake, and then figure out your course of action from there. Number three, figure out your strategy with the team. Many of my business executives feel as though the entire weight of the world is on their shoulders. They feel as though they've got to make all the tough decisions, that nobody knows all the details like they do, and they're feeling a little bit overwhelmed and crushed by the sense of responsibility and whether or not the team even cares about the decisions they make. What I would like to gently encourage you to do is bring the team together and be very honest about your best case scenario and your worst case scenario, and ask for their help in figuring out the courses of action. When you get the team involved and you ask them for honest input, it helps you map out what it is you need to do. You might discover that there's some policies that have been preventing your people from being as effective as they would like to be for you. And then you learn this, and then you have the ability to change that. Sometimes you might find somebody on your team who says, you know what, we went through this before and this is what we did and that worked. Try not to reinvent the wheel if you don't need to reinvent the wheel. Somebody else may have already come up with a scenario or a situation that could solve some of the problems right now. Number four, keep everyone informed as to what's going on. The number one complaint employees have said they've had this year with their first line supervisors, their leadership, and their managers is we don't feel as though we know what's going on. Nobody wants to hear that their company is laying off people by seeing it on the news for the first time. That's not fair. And then they lose trust in their immediate first line supervisors because they think, you didn't trust me enough to tell me that. And then the supervisors say, but we didn't know. And then the employees get mad anyway. And they say, but you should have known. You're the boss. We expect you to get good information and pass it along to us. And they're right. So provide information as soon as it's available. People need information during times of uncertainty more than anything. They want to know that you, as their boss, know what's going on and that you've got a plan to handle, and you can handle anything regardless of what happens. Our job as leaders during this time is to support and protect our people, but in a good way. And that means helping them get the great information they need, not the junk that we all just delete, not the standard stock answers, but real information about what we know, when we know it, even though we know it's not going to be complete information. When I was in the Navy, I worked for an Army general, and half the staff was terrified of him because he did have a bit of a temper. But when he had that temper, it was because somebody wasn't giving him information when they knew it. And he said, why don't I have this information? And they would say, oh, General, we want to make it really pretty. We want to put it in a PowerPoint. He said, just come into my office and talk to me. I need information and I need it fast. In a battlefield, we do not have time to make PowerPoints that are going to figure out what we're going to do next. We need to make the decisions based on the information we have right now. And we know it's not going to be perfect information. We might get 80 or 90% of the information that's out there, but that's better than none when you have to make tough decisions. So when we think about how leaders respond to crises, the time element and the acceleration of the response cannot be overstated. If you don't tell people what's going on as soon as you know it, it's useless, it's obsolete. You've got to be timely and make sure your people know what you know when you know it. Otherwise, you lose their faith and confidence and their productivity along the way. So then we implement our crisis communication plan because this communication does solve a lot of problems. So we want to make sure that our communication methods are in place or solidified before there's a problem. In the military, we have a line diagram so that once one person gets notified, you're supposed to call 3 people, and then they call 3 people, and they call 3 people. I know, it sounds like one of those old shampoo commercials. But the idea was to get information to those people. And once you completed your part of the phone tree, you were supposed to report back to the person on top so that we could track whenever we were missing somebody. And we need, during a crisis, to communicate more than you think you need to communicate. The time to create a communication plan is not during the crisis, it's before the crisis. In less than a minute, could you get hold of all the people in your organization? Could you find ways to communicate with all the people in your organization? What if email went down? What if your server crashed? What if? Think about, again, the best case scenario and the worst case scenario, and move forward somewhere in the middle. Number 5, be specific. Stick to the facts when you're communicating during a crisis. Be honest, and like I said before, be timely. Sometimes people try to sugarcoat the truth because they don't want people to feel bad, or they're worried that they're going to overreact. But you've got to be the one in control of your message. And half the message delivered late is not good. Deliver as much of the message as you can as soon as you possibly can get it out to your people so that they know how to prepare. People do not respond well to uncertainty. We're kind of like the stock market that way. We prefer certainty to uncertainty. We can handle bad news. What we can't handle is uncertainty. This is where that phrase, "just wait till your father comes home," may have come into play. It's the uncertainty that causes us to think a little bit more about that. And action trumps fear. During any time of crisis, you as a leader might be a little bit frustrated because you're now working harder than ever. You're working longer days. Your emails have exponentially exploded. I get all of that. But for the people who work for you, you've got to break up tasks so that people get wins. People during times of uncertainty, times of crisis, challenge, and change, they need things they can cross off their list. They need things that make them feel good about the accomplishment. As a leader, break up tasks to keep people focused on what it is you need done, because action trumps fear every single time. If people are feeling fearful and frustrated, they need to take action, small baby steps, just to make sure that they're moving forward in the right direction. If you give them a mammoth project, they may be overwhelmed and they won't be able to take even the first step. And number 7, this is what we teach our SEAL teams, our Force Recon Marines, our Rangers, our Delta Force, all that. Calm is contagious. Be calm in a crisis. Think again, the best case and the worst case scenario, and plan from there. And provide reassurance with your attitude and your action to the people around you. Your calm is going to help people get through this. When you overreact, they're going to overreact. If everybody overreacts, now you have your own crisis right there in your workplace. You can get some of the resources I'm talking about today at Kiwi Live. And again, it's the keyword, keyword dog. My keywords are always dog. I like dogs. If you've met me, seen me, you know that I talk about my dogs all the time. And by the way, I would love, love, love to see pictures of your dog. So if you want to send me an email, I'm at mary@productiveleaders.com. And if you've got a dog, send me a dog picture. If you've got a cat, send me your cat picture. Include the name. That would be great. In 10 years, I might not remember your name, but I'll definitely remember your dog's name or your cat's name or your gerbil, your turtle, your parrot, your ferret, whatever you got. I would love to see pictures of your animals. Also, it might be helpful for you that I created a white paper over here. It's called the COVID-19 and the Future of American Business White Paper. As a former academic, a recovering academic, I write when I can see a trend. So in this white paper, we created a list of 6 categories that are the buckets of opportunity moving the American business forward beyond 2020 and into the future. So we looked really hard at the 6 buckets of opportunity, which are people, resources, processes, technology, sales and marketing, and entrepreneurship. In this 41 or 2-page white paper, it's broken down into challenges, opportunities, and solutions. So if you're one of those people looking at this right now and you're wondering where to take my business to the next level and how to step it up just a little bit, this white paper might be really useful. Folks, this is a difficult time for a lot of people. We've had to pivot, we've had to change, we've had to adapt, and the healthiest businesses will be able to come out of this on the other side successfully.